Hello everyone, so we're gonna just do a little side video real quick just to talk about some optimization things. So in this scene right here, I have, how many was it? I think 17, almost 18,000 trees. And if I jump in and run around, you'll see my performance kind of reflects that. So what's something that we could do to get that frame rate up a bit? Because it doesn't matter how beautiful your game is. If it runs horribly, no one's going to play it long enough to find out how fantastic your story is, how fun your gameplay elements are. If it's running like this, no one cares. But there are things we can do to get even this wildly unoptimized scene above 45 and sometimes into the 50, 60 frames a second mark. Now granted, you would probably never have 18,000 trees, but this is a good demonstration amount. So what you can do is in your project settings, edit project settings. I've got it docked down here so I can show you the difference. There are 3 settings that we can adjust that will make a little bit of graphical difference, but really it's, if it increases performance, sacrifice the visuals. It's great to have a great looking game, don't get me wrong. Graphics are very important when it comes to that. Art direction over graphical fidelity though. So, a little aside. What we want to adjust is our global illumination. Now you have probably heard a lot about lumen. Lumen is great, and I love the technological advances Unreal Engine has made. That said, sometimes we don't need to be pushing the limits. Especially in the indie space. If you're these AAA companies who are pumping out massive games, then yeah, go for it. Use all the technological advances that you want. Let's focus more on... Oh, I did forget to mention, I have everything set to the highest settings. That's another reason this is. But we'll get to that later. But we should be really focusing on more performance. Graphics have kind of hit a peak anyway. Maybe it's just me, but most games nowadays kind of look the same. Everyone's going for the high definition, ultra quality, blah blah blah. They want it to look as real as possible, and they sacrifice so much art style and direction in chasing realism. And they give up performance for it also. We don't want that. Games are meant to be played, not just looked at. So if we find our global illumination, dynamic global illumination method is lumen, we can set that to none. Now you will notice we lost some of our shadowing. But you'll also notice our frames immediately jumped up. Lumen is great. It has a bit of an overhead. Now we can combat that shadowing by going down a little bit further to our shadow maps. So shadow map method, virtual shadow maps. Let's just change that to regular shadow maps. It kind of adjusted our... It's subtle. Actually, the difference is almost unnoticeable, but you will notice the frame rates jumped even higher. So we're pushing 37 with virtual shadow maps. No real noticeable difference. 6-7 frames more per second. Now there's one more thing. And if we scroll down, this one's a little further down. Where is it at? There it is. Anti-aliasing method. Not even going to try to lie. I don't really know what anti-aliasing does. Everything I've seen online, people talking about it, it just kind of makes everything look blurry. And if you get real close on these trees, it does kind of... it looks nice. This is just a low poly set I had. But it kind of... Like if I get over here, it's kind of blurry. It looks a little blurry. So if yours is probably set at TSR. I couldn't remember what it was actually set to. There's a few different options, but we want none of them. I want none. And now it looks, you can see the spaces between the pines a little bit more. But you may have also noticed our frames seemed to have jumped up a little bit. But you remember we were at, 20 frames per second full screen in the play? We jump in now, and we're pushing 40. I've got OBS running at the same time, so it might be taking a little bit. But it already looks more smooth running. And we haven't even sacrificed that much visual quality. In my opinion, it almost looks a little bit better, and it could just be because it's running smoother though. But we can push that even higher. So if we go to our settings, engine scalability, and we set it to medium, then it will look a little different, quite different, for a bit. But you notice the frames jumped way up. But if we set shadows to high, and then foliage to high, we're still sitting at that 50 frames a second, and there's almost no difference between this and the last test, except for I'm consistently hitting 45 and 50 frames a second. Well, there's 40, 37. There's something in this direction that's pulling. But this is also running 18,000 trees that, if I hop off the character and jump up, are not being culled. They're doing something. I don't know. This might be just the settings that I have, but they're not being culled out, and they all have motion on them. So with an optimized scene, you could easily be pushing 60, 70. I mean, interior scenes with this kind of game setup, I usually pull almost 120 frames a second. So these are just things that you might want to do. Lumen is great. Nanite, great. Sounds great. The need for those things is not nearly there as much as people's wanting to use them. So like, let's say if I jump this down to something more realistic. Something you would have for a standard. Something loaded at once. There you go, there's a weird little forest. It's got 8,000 trees. Probably still more than you would have loaded, but they'd probably be closer together. And that's 60, almost 70 frames. So the more optimizations you make, the better it'll run. Even if you get real close up on the grass. I mean, it's running at 60 frames per second in editor, and it looks decent. Might want to bump up some of that just to pop in. But you get what I'm saying. There's optimization things that we can do. Lumen's great. But do we need it all the time in every game to where it comes just standard? I don't think so. In my opinion, it looks better, more old school design style, to where we're going more for performance and with limitations. I just gotta check, not the mesh paint, foliage. Do I have culling on? I don't have any culling on. Yeah, this has no culling. So if you did have that, you know, would you have, oh, it's LODing probably. Interesting. Okay, but anyway, you wouldn't have it like this anyway, just a big open map. You would have like hills and things and channels for your character to go down, and then culling these out and pulling them in before you even saw that kind of graying out. But these are just some things that can help increase your frame rate. Those advancements are great, but just kind of, I don't want to say overrated because they're fantastic, but not completely necessary, especially when you're designing for people's hardware. Not everyone's running dual 4090s and has a development computer. A lot of people sometimes have just, you know, standard desktop that they want to play your game on. You got to keep them in mind too. So building for a medium scale and focusing on performance, I think is going to be a big thing going forward, and it's something we're going to be focusing on this channel from now on. Kind of taking modern design techniques with vintage or retro design philosophy. that kind of thing. I don't know if that makes sense. And I know I'm kind of ranting now. This is a 10-minute video of me just basically saying the same thing. But there's some ways you can increase your performance. I'll see y'all in the next one. Goodbye.